There's something bigger than the sea!
Sometimes you cast wider.
In the small fishing village of Magdala, nestled along the shimmering shores of the Sea of Galilee, the air was thick with the scent of fish and salt. Dawn broke over the water, casting a golden veil across the waves, as fishermen hauled their nets and shouted to one another in the early light. Among them was Amos, a weathered man of 32, whose hands bore the scars of a lifetime pulling nets through the lake's depths. His face, lined by sun and wind, told a story of resilience, but his eyes held a quiet storm, a restless hunger for something beyond the daily catch. Amos was no stranger to the sea. Born into a family of fishermen, he had learned to read the currents before he could read the Torah. His father, Ezra, had taught him the rhythm of the tides, the weight of a good net, and the patience required to wait for fish that sometimes never came. But Ezra was gone now, taken by a fever 2 winters past, leaving Amos to provide for his widowed mother Ruth and his younger brother Levi, a lanky boy of 16 who dreamed of more than nets and boats. The family's small stone house, perched on a hill overlooking the lake, was a place of love, but also of strain, as every empty net meant a leaner meal. It was the spring of 30 AD, and strange rumors had begun to drift through Magdala like the morning mist. Fishermen of the docks spoke of a man from Nazareth, a teacher who walked the shores and spoke of a kingdom not built by hands. They called him Jesus, and the stories were wild. Blind men seeing, lepers cleansed, and words that cut deeper than a fisherman's knife. Amos listened, his calloused hands mending a torn net, but he scoffed. A teacher who doesn't fish doesn't know the hunger of an empty boat, he'd muttered to Levi, who hung on every tale with wide-eyed wonder. Yet the stories lingered, like the scent of fish that never left Amos's skin. Hey, if you're already hooked on Amos's story, smash that like button to let me know you're with me. Drop a net in the comments if you want to see where this fisherman's journey leads. Let's dive in. Amos's days began before dawn, when the stars still glittered over the lake. He and Levi would drag their boat, the Miriam, named for their late sister, to the water's edge, their breath visible in the cool air. The Sea of Galilee was both friend and foe, giving generously one day and withholding the next. That spring, the fish were scarce, and Amos's patience wore thin. The Roman taxes bit harder than ever, and the market in Tiberias paid less for their meager catches. Ruth, with her frail hands, wove baskets to sell, but it wasn't enough. Levi, restless and bold, began to talk of leaving Magdala, of joining the zealots who whispered of rebellion against Rome. "We could fight, Amos," he'd say, his voice sharp with youth. "Better than starving for fish that don't come." Amos would silence him with a glare. "The sea is our fight, boy. Keep your head in the boat." One morning, as Amos cast his net under a sky bruised with clouds, a crowd gathered on the shore. Their voices carried over the water, excited and urgent. Levi, standing knee-deep in the lake, squinted toward the commotion. "It's him, Amos, the teacher from Nazareth." Amos grunted, pulling the net, empty again. "Let him teach. I've got fish to catch." But Levi's eyes sparkled, and he waded ashore, leaving Amos alone in the boat. If you've ever felt stuck like Amos, chasing something that keeps slipping away, drop a fish emoji in the comments. What's your empty net moment? I'm reading every single one.
Amos rowed closer to shore, more out of irritation than curiosity. The crowd was thick, men and women pressing toward a figure he couldn't quite see. The teacher's voice, clear and steady, rose above the murmurs, speaking of a kingdom where the hungry would be fed and the weary would find rest. Amos tied the boat to a post and stepped onto the sand, his arms crossed. He wasn't here to listen, only to drag Levi back to work, but the words caught him like a hook. "Cast your nets on the other side," the teacher said, as if speaking to the fishermen in the crowd. Amos snorted. "The other side? I've fished this lake since I was a boy. There's no fish today." Yet, something in the voice, its calm authority, made his hands itch to try. Levi returned, his face alight. "Amos, he's different. He's not like the Pharisees, all rules and no heart. He sees people." Amos waved him off, but as they rowed back out, he couldn't shake the words. That evening, their net came up empty again, and Amos's frustration boiled over. He slammed his fist against the boat's edge, startling Levi. "Why do we bother?" he growled. "The sea's turned against us." Levi, quieter than usual, said, "Maybe it's not the sea. Maybe we're missing something." Amos glared, but said nothing, the teacher's words echoing in his mind. Yo, if Amos's struggle hits home, hit that subscribe button. I'm dropping part 2 of this story next week, and trust me, it gets wild. Tell me in the comments, what would you do if you were Amos right now? Keep fishing or listen to the teacher? The next day, Amos woke to find Levi gone. Ruth, stirring a pot of lentils over the fire, said he'd left at dawn to hear the teacher again. Amos stormed to the shore, his temper flaring. The crowd was larger now, spilling across the beach, and Levi was near the front, listening as the teacher spoke of seeds falling on rocky soil. Amos pushed through, ready to drag his brother home, but he stopped short. The teacher's eyes, warm and piercing, seemed to find him in the crowd. "Blessed are those who hunger," he said, "for they shall be filled." Amos felt a pang, not in his stomach, but in his chest. He turned away, his heart pounding, and pulled Levi with him. "We're fishermen, not dreamers," he snapped. But Levi's silence was louder than words. Back at the Miriam, Amos cast the net with a fury, as if to prove the teacher wrong. The lake was still, the fish absent. Hours passed, and the sun climbed high. Levi, usually talkative, worked quietly, his gaze drifting to the shore. Finally, Amos threw down the net. "Fine," he said, "let's try the other side." Levi's eyes widened, but he said nothing, helping to shift the net. They cast it deep, and within moments, the ropes strained. Amos pulled, his muscles burning, and the net surfaced, teeming with fish, so many the boat tilted. Levi laughed, a sound Amos hadn't heard in months. "It's a miracle!" Levi shouted. Amos, panting, stared at the net, his mind racing. Was it luck? Or something more? And hit that like button to keep these biblical stories coming. They hauled the fish to shore, the crowd still lingering as the teacher moved on toward Capernaum. Villagers swarmed to buy the catch, coins clinking into Amos's hands, enough to feed the family for weeks. Ruth wept when she saw the haul, whispering thanks to God. But Amos couldn't shake the unease. He'd fished these waters his whole life. Why now? Why this side? That night, as the family ate a proper meal for the first time in months, Levi spoke softly. He knew, Amos. He knew where the fish were. Amos stared into the fire, his jaw tight. It was a fluke, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. The next morning, Amos found Levi at the docks, not prepping the boat, but talking with 2 other fishermen, Simon and Andrew, men who'd recently left their nets to follow the teacher. "He's calling us to something bigger," Levi said, his eyes bright. Amos felt a surge of anger. "Bigger than our family? Than our mother?" Levi hesitated, then said, "Maybe it's not about leaving. Maybe it's about finding." Amos turned away, his heart a tangled net of duty and doubt. If you're feeling Amos's struggle, torn between the known and the unknown, subscribe now for part 2 next week. It's gonna flip everything. Drop in the comments, would you follow Levi or stay with Amos? I'm reading every one. Days passed, and the fish returned, but not like that day. Amos worked in silence, Levi's words gnawing at him. The teacher's presence lingered in Magdala, his words carried by every passing traveler. One evening, as Amos mended a net under the stars, Ruth sat beside him. "Your father believed in more than fish," she said softly. "He believed in promises we can't see." Amos gripped the net tighter, his throat burning. "I see empty nets and hungry mouths," he said. Ruth touched his hand. "Sometimes, Amos, you have to cast on the other side." The next day, word spread that the teacher would pass through Magdala again, this time healing the sick. Levi begged Amos to come, but he refused, staying with the boat. Yet, as the sun set, he found himself walking toward the crowd, drawn by a pull he couldn't name. The shore was alive with voices, and there, among the sick and the hopeful, was Levi, kneeling beside an old man whose eyes were clouded with blindness. Amos watched, his heart pounding, as the teacher's shadow fell over the man. What happens next will blow you away. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications for part 2. Drop "miracle" in the comments if you're ready to see what Amos witnesses. And if we hit 5,000 likes, I'll film a short version of this story by the actual Sea of Galilee. Write "make it happen" if you're in. The shore of Magdala buzzed with anticipation as the sun dipped low, painting the Sea of Galilee in hues of amber and rose. Amos stood at the edge of the crowd, his fisherman's hands clenched, his heart a knot of doubt and curiosity. The teacher from Nazareth, whose words had turned his brother Levi's head, was now among the sick, his presence drawing every eye. Levi knelt beside an old man, Jonah, whose blind eyes had not seen the lake in years. Amos had known Jonah since childhood, a gruff fisherman who once rivaled his father's skill, but now begged for scraps in the market. The crowd hushed as the teacher approached, his simple tunic catching the evening light. Amos held his breath, unsure why he stayed. The teacher knelt beside Jonah, his voice low but clear. "Do you believe?" he asked. Jonah's trembling hands reached out, groping the air. "If you can give me sight, I will," he rasped. The teacher touched Jonah's eyes, and a gasp rippled through the crowd as the old man blinked, his clouded gaze clearing. He stared at the lake, then at the teacher, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "I see," he cried, falling to his knees. Levi turned to Amos, his face alight with awe. Amos stepped back, his mind reeling. Was this real or some trick of the light? Yo, if this moment gave you goosebumps, drop an I in the comments. What would you do if you saw this miracle? Smash that like button to keep these stories coming. Amos returned to the Miriam that night, his thoughts as tangled as a poorly cast net. Levi chattered endlessly, recounting every detail of Jonah's healing, but Amos barely listened. He stared at the stars reflected on the lake, the teacher's words echoing in his mind. He wanted to dismiss it, to call it madness, but the image of Jonah's eyes, clear and bright, haunted him. At home, Ruth noticed his silence. She asked, "You saw something today, didn't you?" her voice gentle. Amos shrugged, but his hands trembled as he mended a net. "I don't know what I saw," he muttered. Ruth smiled faintly. "Sometimes, Amos, faith starts with not knowing."
The next morning, Levi was up before dawn, not to fish, but to follow the teacher to Capernaum. Amos exploded. "You'd abandon the boat? Our family?" Levi met his glare, his voice steady. "I'm not abandoning you. I'm finding something worth following." Amos watched him go, his chest tight with anger and something deeper, fear. The Miriam felt empty without Levi, the lake too vast for one man. Amos cast the net alone, his arms aching, his mind churning. The fish were few, and by noon he gave up, rowing back to shore. If you're feeling Amos's struggle right now, torn between duty and something bigger, subscribe for more stories like this. Drop faith in the comments and tell me, would you stay with the boat or chase the teacher? I'm reading every one. In the days that followed, Magdala buzzed with stories of the teacher. A woman's fever broke at his touch. A child's limp vanished. Amos avoided the crowds, but the tales found him anyway, carried by neighbors and market vendors. Levi returned late each night, his face glowing, speaking of parables, sowers, mustard seeds, and hidden pearls. He says the kingdom is like a net, Levi told Amos one evening, catching all kinds, good and bad. Amos snorted. A net is only as good as the fish it catches. But Levi's words stuck, like a hook in his heart. One stormy afternoon, as gray clouds churned over the lake, Amos was repairing the Miriam when a young girl, Sarah, ran to him. Her mother, Deborah, lay dying of a wasting sickness, and the village healer had given up. Levi says the teacher can help, Sarah pleaded, her eyes red. Amos hesitated. He'd seen Jonah's healing, but Deborah was beyond hope. Still, he couldn't refuse the girl. He grabbed his cloak and followed her to a small house near the market, where Deborah lay on a mat, her breath shallow. Levi was there, praying softly. The teacher hadn't come. Word was he was in Bethsaida, but Levi insisted they wait. Amos scoffed. Wait for what? A man who's not here? If you're on the edge of your seat, hit that subscribe button. Part 2 is just getting started. Drop hope in the comments if you think Amos is about to see something big. I want to know what you're feeling. Hours passed, and Deborah's breathing grew weaker. Amos paced, his frustration mounting, but Levi remained calm, his eyes fixed on the door. Just as Amos turned to leave, footsteps sounded outside. A man entered, not the teacher, but one of his followers, a broad-shouldered fisherman named Simon. "The teacher sent me," Simon said, his voice steady. He knelt beside Deborah, placed a hand on her forehead and prayed. Amos watched, his heart pounding, as Deborah's chest rose stronger, her eyes fluttering open. Sarah sobbed, clinging to her mother. Simon smiled at Amos. He said to tell you, cast your net wider. Amos stood frozen, his world tilting. Was this the teacher's doing, even from afar? That night, Amos couldn't sleep. He walked to the shore, the lake dark and restless under the storm clouds. He thought of his father, who'd taught him to trust the sea, and of Ruth, who believed in promises unseen. He thought of Levi, chasing a kingdom he couldn't touch, and of Deborah, alive against all odds. The teacher's words carried by Simon burned in his mind. Cast your net wider. Amos knelt by the water, his hands gripping the sand. For the first time, he prayed, not for fish, but for understanding. The next morning, Levi announced he was joining the teacher's followers. "I'm not leaving you," he said, gripping Amos's shoulder. "I'm asking you to come." Amos shook his head, his voice hoarse. Someone has to fish. But as Levi walked away, Amos felt the weight of his choice. He took the Miriam out alone, casting the net as the sun rose. The lake was calm, and the net came up full. Not a miracle, but enough. He smiled faintly, whispering, "Maybe I'll try the other side tomorrow." If this ending has you thinking, drop a heart in the comments. What's Amos's next step? And if we hit 5,000 likes, I'll film a short version of this story by the Sea of Galilee. Write, "Make it happen," if you're in. Subscribe and hit the bell for more biblical tales. Years later, when whispers of the teacher's death and impossible resurrection reached Magdala, Amos was no longer the same man. He still fished, but his nets were cast with purpose, not just for fish, but for moments of faith. He'd seen too much to doubt. Jonah's sight, Deborah's life, Levi's courage. The Miriam became a place of stories, where he told his children of the teacher who turned fishermen to seekers. And under the stars, when the lake was quiet, Amos would touch the worn ropes of his net and pray, "Thank you for the wider catch."